Your Creative Push, episode 120.
You have to learn how to get excited about sharing it with people and find a way that they could then use what you're sharing with them to better their own lives.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Jacob Looney. Jacob was born in Athens, Texas, and he moved to Philadelphia in 2008 to study animation at the University of the Arts, but later transferred to the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts to study painting. After graduation, he went on with a travel scholarship to explore around parts of the UK and Scandinavia, and Jacob returned to Philadelphia in 2014 to begin working at several museums while continuing his art practice in West Philly. And Jacob, let's start there with the museums, because that's what led to this incredible thing that you're doing now. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience at the museums?
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to, of course, thank you for having me on the podcast.
Oh, of course, man.
And I get, museums were what really pushed me into fine arts. When I started at the University of Arts, I was focusing on animation. I'd come right out of high school thinking, I'm going to work for Disney and I'm going to do hand-drawn animation because that's going to come back again. And I was very strictly in the mode of a painting is a good painting when it looks like something from reality. And I had an art history teacher who really pushed me to go to the art museum and look at this very specific abstract painting by Mark Rothko. And I remember having this experience when I saw this painting, just this completely, taken aback feeling that, I was looking at something that was completely larger than myself and crossing so many mental boundaries and really communicating in this visual manner, which I hadn't felt before. And that started this launch into looking into more of a fine art realm, as well as, using museums as a best friend throughout that entire process.
I love that. Yeah, like a best friend, like a companion almost.
Yeah. Yeah.
So from there, you would start to draw in the museums, is that right?
Yeah, it was pretty common thing that I think a lot of schools do that, where they have their students just go and you either draw from the big paintings or so. But when I graduated, I ended up getting a job at the Barnes Foundation.
Oh, cool.
And there it was really luck of the draw that I got the job, because I was there as a guide, walking people around, talking about the collection and just doing general question and answer. And from there, it really, all these jobs that I've gotten at museums started from that one. And it just came from knowing someone else that got me the job at the Academy of Natural Sciences, to then getting me the job at the Philadelphia Art Museum, to then getting me workshop teaching jobs over at the Academy of the Fine Arts. And it kind of just, skyrocketed into all these different museums that I was working at. And drawing was just something that, I think that a lot of artists, that's just kind of not necessarily a nervous habit, but just something that you always are constantly doing. And so it just became really natural that while I was at, the Academy of Natural Sciences, that I was drawing there.
And what does drawing at a museum do for your creativity? Does it change kind of the way you look at the things in the museum and the way you look at things in life? Oh,
definitely. Yeah. Well, I think just in general, working in a job, especially at museums, you get such a specific, well, actually, it's a pretty diverse range, actually, of people that come into the museum. And when you're trained to almost have this eye of looking at things and searching for, visual moments that scream, draw me to you, you kind of search for those in the people that are visiting the museums. And whether I was at the Academy, drawing, dinosaurs, or, the kid that had just run past me, it became in this kind of momentum of really studying the energy of these places and what people were getting from them and what I was getting from drawing at them. And I think the biggest thing is, drawing, it gives you a process of both looking at something, but then also internalizing it in your mind, and then, using your hand to put that information on paper. And the more you do it, the more it expands and the more it grows, and you really start, questioning the world around you and seeing things and noticing moments that otherwise, would have went right past you if you weren't looking at it for, 10 minutes or an hour or a couple days or so.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. So can you tell us a little bit about your Kickstarter project?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So while I was working at the Academy of Natural Sciences, as I mentioned, I was just naturally drawing, filling up this one sketchbook. And it was once I had gotten in like maybe 50 drawings or so that they were starting to have this cohesive feel. And I remember showing it to my roommates at the time, and they were really digging the drawings. And so it was like kind of really getting me into it as well to keep, doing at least a drawing or two a day there. And my first idea with this was like, oh, this would be a really cool thing once I finish the sketchbook to like bury it somewhere in the museum so that they could find it in the future. And my roommates were just like immediately, don't do that. Hold on to these. These are really good. You shouldn't like just hide them away. And they kind of pushed me into this, realm of thinking of maybe you could find a way to share these with people other than just, framing them or putting them on a website. The idea of putting them into a small book that people could take with them kind of launched from that. And I started really expanding on this idea of not just making a book of my drawings, but how this idea of drawing in museums could influence people that, maybe haven't picked up a pen and paper for years or, decades, and how they could, use this book as a way to guide them through a museum and see that maybe if you did have that sketchbook with you, you could get a lot more from this visit than if you were just wandering around,
Yeah, absolutely. Like you were talking about before, to be able to have those moments where you're like, where it just begs you to draw it.
Yeah.
And then when you don't have your sketchbook with you, I think that's just a good idea for life to just have your sketchbook with you or have a notepad with you or just have a habit of writing down ideas if you're a writer or something, or even an artist in your phone, and just having that habit so that you're constantly thinking about, when you get those ideas, you can put them down. It's like waking up from a dream and having an inspiration, but then forgetting about it later that day if you don't have the habit of writing it down right away.
I think it's just, you get into this habit too. The first maybe 2 drawings or 2 notes that you take down feel so awkward in this blank book. But once you get like, a couple pages in, or you have like this, scroll of just like scribbled notes that you've made, suddenly it feels so natural to just go through that process. And, you just keep expanding and, allowing your creativity to really blossom from that point.
Yeah, for sure. Does it feel weird to you to have now, like, you're creating this book and it's almost like you're, bearing a part of you, like it's like your own private sketchbook, but now you're like trying to publish it, you're creating a thing for other people to look at. What does that feel like?
Oh, it's definitely weird. I mean, one of my I think biggest struggles growing up was, I was a very inward person. A lot of it I think comes from such a big family, and especially like a big family of girls. I grew up with 3 cousins that were all females. My aunt lived with us, my mom, and then my 2 sisters as well. And so one of my biggest relationships was just leaving the house and wandering off with my dog, and really having these private kind of imaginary worlds that we would escape into. And it helped feed this creative need, but it also put me in a place where I was so in my own zone. When you get to this point where you're, I think especially outside of college, and you're now trying to make this a thing that you can live off of, you have to learn how to get excited about sharing it with people and find a way that they could then use what you're sharing with them to better their own lives. And so that's been so much of the focus of the book, is realizing that this idea of, all these drawings I've done are, they are visually, I think, really cool to look at, but it's much more about this message behind it, that you can take this idea of drawing in a museum into your own world and find satisfaction, even if you're not an artist or someone that considers himself a creative individual.
It gives you a reason. It gives you a concentration as you go into the museum or go into life or whatever it is, something to look for, a purpose for going there. What would you say to non-believers that would say, you really expect me to go into a museum and people are going to see me drawing? What would you say to them to get over that weirdness?
Well, one of the things that I did before launching this project was I did a big workshop over at the Academy of the Fine Arts. And there it's both an art school and art museum. And every week they do these big family workshops. My workshop that I did was I made these sketchbooks for people that they had to take with them to the museum. And each page there was a different kind of drawing game that they would do. And we definitely faced a little resistance at first. It was a lot of like the parents just giving it to the kid to, do their activity, keep quiet, go in the corner, draw a little bit so mom and dad can have a quiet moment. But so many of the activities later on throughout the day had to involve them. And I remember this one that it was like a real breakthrough moment where people just learned to kind of like drop their shoulders a little bit, relax, and allow themselves to, maybe make a bad drawing or just make something and get so much out of it. And the game was we had the kids and the adults break up into two different groups. And the kids had to, in the first part, find a painting or a sculpture and had to mime it out and try to look like that person in the painting, while the adults then drawed the kids. And then they reversed and did the exact same thing. And just getting people to have this interaction, even outside of the group they came to the museum with, just completely shifted the energy. And suddenly people were able to laugh. They had a lot of fun. And this idea of making a drawing wasn't for them about impressing anybody. It was just about having an enjoyable time in the museum. And I think that idea of just enjoying the experience and not necessarily, putting this thing up on a pedestal that, is going to be judged by the masses is the big kind of separation. And once you can get people to see that, they allow themselves to, almost be vulnerable in their creative output and allow themselves to, get back to that habit of making things.
Yeah, I love that story. And it's like letting go,
Yeah, totally.
Whenever I go to museums or, any type of thing like that, sometimes I feel a pressure. Like you have to see, it's almost like you have to schedule it out so you see everything. And it's not like when you're doing that, it's like, all right, like I've spent too much time looking at this painting that I really enjoy. I got to move on to the next thing so that I can, really utilize my time. But I think you're right. It's like you need to just sit back, sit there and just get lost in something that really inspires you and not have that pressure of, the daily life that we have outside of the museum, like where it's, I got to get this done by this time, then I got to go to work, and it shouldn't be scheduled. It should just be, you just let go and enjoy.
Yeah, definitely.
What can people expect to get with the book if they want to support you on Kickstarter?
Well, there's so many different levels that they can help support the project at. The most material thing is actually getting the physical book. But a lot of like the bigger ideas is, I'm really pushing for this kind of movement to allow people to start drawing again. And it's interesting, as I was publishing the project, I was doing a lot of research about other museums and what kind of public programs they run with, the public doing art in the museum, and came across that at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, they've actually stopped allowing people to take photos. And they have this huge new movement where, they give people like a sketchbook and a pen when you come in, and they have this key hashtag that they use called Start Drawing. And, it's creating this kind of movement that people are much more engaged with this kind of endeavor of, not just taking the photo, getting their 10 seconds and then moving on to the next object, but, it's slowing down the pace of people walking into the museum. And it's kind of what you said before too, that, this day by day scheduling that we do, this hour by hour, we got to get to this to do this so that we can do this and then get home by this time so that we can go to sleep, wake up and do the same thing again. And I see this again and again in the museums where, it is just that task kind of agenda. We got to see the lions, we got to see the butterflies, we got to see the dinosaurs. Otherwise, it's not going to be worthwhile. But if you can get people to slow down and just kind of step outside of that and enjoy the moment, so much more of that experience is taken in and remembered and allowed to be something of substance. And I really want the book to almost be, a big example of that, kind of a visual tool that supports that larger idea.
Yeah, like you're saying, it is, slowing down. But I remember the other day, well, this was like a few months ago, I brought up the Mona Lisa. I just Google imaged the Mona Lisa, and I just sat there and I stared at it for a while. And, like I've seen the Mona Lisa a bunch of times, but I've never actually like looked at it, like really tried to appreciate it until that moment. And I think it was a kind of interesting moment for me because I just by staring at it for a while, I kind of understood why it was so great. I remember asking years ago, like, what's the big deal about the Mona Lisa? It's like this small little painting. Like, why is it so revered and stuff? And just by staring at it for a while, I could really appreciate it. And I think that just can go for a lot of things in life. And, is just slowing down the pace, like you said, and just really trying to take it in and just get kind of lost in it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, once you get to that point where you can just allow yourself to visually enjoy something, that simple enjoyment of what seems just like a moment of relaxation completely impacts, that then structured lifestyle of then when you're suddenly, again, taking that creative enjoyment into an active looking engagement that you can use to prosper from.
For sure. And that's why, I definitely suggest that people check out your Kickstarter project. You can head to jacoblooney.com/Kickstarter if you want to get more details about that and find out all the good stuff you can get. Now, you're also like a really talented artist. Like, I know we're talking about this project a lot, but you're very talented. And I was wondering, do you have any things that hold you back, any resistances that keep you from drawing in the past or still currently in the present?
Definitely. I think there were kind of two big things that I had to hurdle over after college. And like one of them was what I had mentioned before, that kind of verbal shyness that I had earlier on in life. And I remember when I was in high school, I was much more focused on music. I was in this big heavy metal band. And I loved the fact that I could go into this like garage that we had. I was the lead singer. I could just roar out and really, allow my emotions to be verbally expressed. And, it was great to have my family and friends come hang out with us. But the moment it then got to, let's go perform in like a big stage, for some reason, I always just like put on the brakes and had to like stop and find the reason why I didn't want to do that. And it was the same with once I got more into fine arts, this idea that when I was in college, it was, such a nurturing environment. Everybody is so interested in what you're making and they're really inclined to want to have a conversation with it about you. And they want to know what they can take from it and, how they can, look at what you're making and inspire themselves and vice versa. And then when you get out of college, you still hold on to a little bit of that community, but a lot of it disperses. And you kind of, have this shock and realization that people don't necessarily need that verbal or visual interaction. They're not forced to have to talk about art with you. They're not necessarily, that's what they're going to first come to when they meet you or whatnot. And realizing that this verbal shyness that I had before was something that was really hindering, because after school, I had to find a way to allow myself to share what I was making and realize that, putting myself out there, even if someone didn't like it, it was allowing myself to start that conversation that people wouldn't necessarily know how to begin with you. And that was like a real big hurdle that I had to come across, this idea of putting myself out there and realizing that, you could come across, people that aren't interested, or you could come across people that think what you're doing is not interesting in the slightest bit. But you could find someone that's completely inspired by what you're making or wants to have that conversation, which will be 10 times more nurturing than, the 100 people that have, might have discouraged you or anything like that.
Well, I am very interested. So what's some like advice for getting over that, for when you do try to engage somebody in conversation and they are thinking about scores or whatever, and they're just like completely uninterested? How do you not take that personally?
You find a way to almost engage yourself with it. I think once I got out of school and I was like in this workforce of having to constantly be at a job, I was initially deterred by that fact that, these people aren't interested in it at all. But then I started realizing that there's so much of what they're interested that I can allow myself to jump into and take into a creative outlet. Because like when I was in school, it wasn't what I was naturally interested in, this idea of museum education or how can I share this idea of drawing. But it was suddenly once I was in the museum and I was seeing all these people that were interacting with the collection or whatever was on display, and realizing that their interest was suddenly something that I could use to spark a level of creativity. And, something with like, going to a baseball game now with a bunch of friends, I don't have to necessarily go into like the history of Velasquez or, why Titian is the end all be all.
Right.
But I can like look at what they're looking at and see why they're so sparked by this, and think about that kind of social engagement and what that means for creativity and how they're using this interest in a way that's enhancing their own, maybe structured lifestyle. And how I can then jump on board with that and take that similar interest and have it influence my creative lifestyle.
I love that takeaway, man.
Thanks, man.
Jacob, with everything you've got going on, what's your formula for balancing your time?
It wasn't something, it was something that I took a while to move into. But essentially I got to a point where there was just there was no excuses for not making things. And a lot of this comes from just, watching someone like my father who does a similar kind of schedule that I do, where he works a ton of different jobs, in a very creative manner himself. He's an engineer. And then, at the same time, somehow balances having a family, balances working on this, crazy old home that he's been restoring, and somehow keeps it on a sane level. And I remember at a point where I was doing a similar thing of working multiple jobs, over 70 hours a week, and going crazy from this because I hadn't been able to pick up a paintbrush in a while. And he was just telling me, you just got to do it, because otherwise you're going to lose yourself. You have to find, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour, staying up till 4 a.m. and being tired the next day just to make something, because otherwise you're going to lose yourself. And that loss of a minute or an hour or a couple hours is going to give you so much more than you expect. Keeping up with that practice and, continuing to make things, it's going to give you so much more than if you spend, an hour watching Seinfeld or in front of Arrested Development or something.
Yeah.
And so I think it's always when I get to a point, because I still do quite a few jobs where I'm, going 7 days a week, I get home and I just want to sit back. I have to kick my brain back into just make something before you go to bed. Keep that habit going, keep that muscle working, because otherwise you end up at a point that I think you do lose a bit of yourself.
Yeah, and it's easy to, once you get into that habit, because it's so easy to just come home and start up the Netflix queue. And that's one of the things I've talked about a lot. That was my biggest thing for a long time.
Yeah.
You just get stuck in that because it's easy, and you don't have to put yourself out there, and you don't have to put the extra work in, but it's all about putting in, like you said, before you go to bed, just do one small step. It's just making one little step every single day, and then you can go a really long distance in your progress and your output. So that's huge advice. I really can relate to that and appreciate that. And yeah, giving up a little bit of time, a little bit of sleep, you're not going to really miss that so much in a week's time or a month's time. But if you have something tangible that you've created and that you can kind of hold out in front of you, it's so much more worth it.
Absolutely.
Jacob, it's time for the final push. This is where I ask you to reach to the microphone and grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, that's thinking, maybe I can do this too. Maybe I need to get back into my creativity, or maybe I need to go out into a museum and sketch and just open up my creative eyes that way and slow down the pace, and just give them your best advice and push them to pursue their creative passions.
I think one of the, like I mentioned before, such a big hurdle that I had to overcome after school was you do get into a habit of working a 9-to-5 job, or even a night job. And you do end up putting a lot of yourself into that because you want to show that you can handle the job or be an addition to that workforce. And you can find yourself in this routine where, you've gone a week, a month, or even a year or a couple of years, and you haven't gone back to that creative outlet. And it can be extremely discouraging and, extremely nerve-wracking as well to jump back into it. But I think once you take that risk, once you allow yourself to be vulnerable again and, put something on paper, you get so much out of it that you wouldn't have expected. And I think starting this drawing project was just a way to kind of beat the time while I was working this job, has turned into one of the most fulfilling projects I've ever worked on, and completely reshaped, where I see myself going in my career. And I think everyone, whether they went to a creative school or not, even if they did business or any type of, other field other than the arts, they can find something out of this similar outlet. They can get so much of allowing the creative push to influence their lives. so I always just say, take the risk. What's the harm that it's going to do if you make a bad drawing?
No harm at all.
Yeah.
So I love that advice. It's just, you got to get back to it. It might seem scary and it might seem a little bit overwhelming, but it's just taking a little step every day.
Exactly.
So, Jacob, man, thank you so much for coming on the show today and for giving us that push.
Thank you so much for having me.
Of course. And you can find Jacob on his website. That's jacoblooney.com, Looney. On Instagram, he is jacob.looney. On Tumblr, he is Jacob Looney. And on Facebook, he is Looney Jacob. And you can head to his Kickstarter page. Again, that's jacoblooney.com/Kickstarter. If you want to check that project out, check out what you can get, and check out more details about what it's all about. And you can find all the links to all the resources we talked about today at yourcreativepush.com/Jacob Looney. Jacob, thanks again and good luck, man.
Thanks, man. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, thanks again, Jacob. Guys, when's the last time you went to a museum? When's the last time you appreciated art or sculpture or anything else in real life? It's a completely different experience, and we've talked about it a little bit on the podcast before. It's one thing to see art on a computer screen, to kind of scroll through on Instagram or a Google image search. It's a completely different thing to go to a museum or to just sit in front of a painting or in front of a piece of art that you wouldn't normally sit and ponder and think about. I think you use a different part of your brain. I obviously have no authority to be talking about this because I don't know any science behind it, but being able to slow down the pace and just sit there and just ponder can open up inspiration that you will not be able to get anywhere else. And I think that Jacob is doing an awesome thing by trying to promote this idea of heading there with your sketchbook so that you can not only figure out how you see art differently, but how you can incorporate that into your own art or creative pursuit. So maybe think about doing that this weekend or an upcoming day off. Why not spend a leisurely day at the museum? And by leisurely, I mean really relaxing, not putting on pressure to see everything like we were talking about in the episode, but bring your sketchbook and have the only goal to be inspired, to get lost in art, and to learn something new about an artist or a piece of art that you hadn't thought about before, and to learn something new about yourself. Just walk around until you find something that really screams at you to be drawn, like Jacob was saying, and just draw it. And again, definitely check out what Jacob's doing. yourcreativepush.com/Jacob Looney. I love what he's doing, and he deserves to be supported, so definitely check that out. On Friday's show, we have Steven Silver.
When you go into that meeting today, are they going to stab you? No. Are they going to drown you? No. The worst thing they're going to say is no. And when you realize that that's the worst that anyone will ever say to you is no, then you can just start to relax a bit. And he was absolutely right. And that's what I've realized through my whole life is all you can ever do is ask. And through asking, things, happen. If you don't ask, nothing can happen. And I think it's having that awareness of that.
Steven is a talented freelance character designer who has worked on a ton of different projects, but also does his own projects. He has a YouTube channel. He has apps. He has a school in LA. And I had a very, very inspirational talk with him about drawing and creativity and life in general that you don't want to miss. And that's on Friday for you. But hopefully today you're inspired to go and get your work done. So go and get it done. And then head to the museum afterwards. I love you all. I hope you get some awesome work done today. And we will be here on Friday if you need the push again. Have a great day, everybody. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.